r/AskReddit. Dads of Reddit, what's your best don't tell mom story? Late to the party, but it's good. My father has been a subdued, mild-mannered man for as long as I remember. My mother wears the pants in the family, and he meekly obeys to maintain the peace. This was not always the case. He served in the Navy when younger, and used to drag race the beach parking lots of Norfolk, Virginia in the 60s. Their first car, when he got married, was a 1968 Camaro SS. Before that he had GTOs and other muscle cars. In 1994, my dad, well into his subdued state, was the proud owner of a Chevy Caprice. Nothing special, but it had a 305 V8 and rear-wheel drive. It was a big boat, but had decent power. He and I were out for a drive to a neighboring town, and the main road was under construction. They had built a temporary bypass with a strict 35 miles per hour speed limit. The regular road was 55 miles per hour, and so the traffic through the bypass was usually faster than the 35 miles per hour speed. My dad was the lead car of a large pack of traffic and was cruising along at about 60 miles per hour. We came around a corner to find a highway patrol car in the median facing directly at us. He flipped his lights on before we even went past him. To my shock, my dad didn't slow down to pull over. He looked in his rear view, saw the heavy traffic behind us, and floored the gas pedal. The cop, shocked as the Caprice roared past, couldn't pull out, and U-turned very quickly due to the cars that were behind us. My dad sped the Caprice up to a full 120 miles per hour heading up the hill and away from the patrolman. He was calm and smooth as he roared around the other vehicles, but didn't say a thing. We drove about 1 mile, passing a business and an off-ramp. Then he quickly caught the next off-ramp, pulled off, and turned left under the overpass. He parked under the overpass and turned the car off. Silently he waited 30 seconds until we heard the scream of a siren wail overhead on the freeway. He dropped the car into drive, slowly pulled out, and got back on the road in our original direction. After what seemed like hours of silence, he turned and looked at me. Don't tell your mother. It amazes me to know what lurks under the mild manners of my dad. My parents divorced, and my mom remarried. When I was about 10, she became a bit of a holy roller. When I say a bit, I mean off the deep end. For context, this was the mid-80s. Suddenly, cartoons were evil. I couldn't watch He-Man, Voltron, Richie Rich, Tom and Jerry. Nothing. She could see evil in anything. Smurfs taught homosexuality. He-Man taught witchcraft. Richie Rich taught greed. And so on. Magazines were evil too. I was at the age where driving was in sight, so I had various car magazines coming to the house. Not anymore. Why? Because the sexy bikini-laden car models taught hypersexuality, and it would turn me into a rapist. Don't even get me started on video games either. I was only allowed to play religious video games and watch religious cartoons. Also, no TV in my room anymore, because if I was left alone with a TV, I'd end up being influenced into being a gay, murdering, Satan-worshipping warlock. My dad and stepdad hated each other, but looking back, they both looked out for my best interests. They both thought my mother's religious stuff was a bit nuts too. So, they had some common ground. As a side note, my stepfather must have a special place reserved in heaven for him because he stuck with her through a decade of absolute hardcore religious fanaticism. She's much more reserved now. Anyway, on weekends, I'd see my dad. When I'd get there, he'd have a couple VHS tapes ready for me, all my favorite cartoons. He and I would spend half a day binge watching all that animated evil. And my car magazines were now being delivered to his house, so I got those too. My dad bought me a small TV for my room. It was a 13-inch camping TV. It was about the size of a milk crate. My room had a lot of angles in the walls and ceiling, so I had some good hiding spots. My mom went on a retreat and came back all gung-ho thinking I was on drugs because the evangelist said that any child who wasn't as interested in church as their parents is a child who's being influenced by the devil and most likely is on drugs. My stepdad said he'd search my room for the drugs. She and I stood and watched. He ended up finding the TV, which was in a box in a hidden hole behind my bed, but he didn't tell her. He found my stash of Mad magazines too. To her, those were 100% filth. He didn't tell her about those either. After saying my room was clean, she left. He walked out with a wink. When I came back from school the next day, my stepdad had moved my bed and built me a fort in the hide hole that had a little entertainment center built into the backside of my headboard. He also added 2 brand new gaming systems. It was cramped, but whenever my mom was off, he and I would gather around my tiny TV in the hide hole and play video games. Why hide? Because he wasn't allowed to play video games either, and he didn't want to get caught either. Whenever she'd come in, we'd pull the cord on the entertainment center which dumped Legos out and covered the TV and video game consoles. We'd tell her we were playing Legos. She'd ask why we were in the tiny hide hole, and he'd just be like, "Forts are awesome, babe." She thought we were nuts, but we got away with it. Cheers to all the dads who helped us get away with shit. I'm a dad, but this story is about my dad. It was the summer before my last year at college. A friend of mine got a job across country and he decided to take the opportunity to see as much of America as possible before he had to start work. He asked me to come along. It was going to be a month-long road trip. We'd contacted a few friends and relatives along the way where we could crash. The company was paying for gas and 5 nights hotel, and we brought along a tent for the days we didn't have a place to stay. I'd saved up a little money at my summer job. The night before we left, my dad was sitting in his recliner reading the paper as always. I sat there on the couch watching TV. Now, my dad was a very conservative man. Old school. The kind of kid should be seen and not heard parent. Not big on emotional displays. Frugal to a fault. So after everyone else had turned in for the night, it was just me and him. He motioned me over and pulled out an envelope he had hidden. Looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Don't tell your mother about this," as he handed me the envelope. It was filled with money. Not a lot by today's standards, but a lot in 1986, and without a doubt more money than I'd ever seen my dad carry. I sat down and said, "I don't know what to say." He responded, "Have fun," and went back to his newspaper. He died 6 months later. That moment was the last real one-on-one interaction I had with my father. A little while after he died, my mom was going through his dresser drawer when she found his stash. Apparently my dad had been squirreling away cash for years, walking around money for when he went on one of his many fishing trips. He dipped into it so that I'd have some walking around money on my trip. Went fishing in questionable conditions. Left the harbor in 6 to 8 foot waves in a 19 boat. Probably shouldn't have gone out at all in retrospect. Had a great day off fishing in the Lever Point. Start to head home, and things had deteriorated big time. Going home in 10, 12 foot waves, with big ones hitting 14. Struggling to even make it through them. All this is happening in late November in the North Atlantic. Bad fucking news. If anything goes wrong, no one else is out there to help us. My dad tells me at one point, "Take your life jacket off. It won't help out here. It will just make the inevitable take longer. We make it home or we don't. I love you." To this day, that's the only time I have been scared on a boat, and I have been in some serious situations. When we made it back, he said, "Never tell your mom what I told you. That is between you and I." So yeah, that's my craziest don't tell mom story. Edit. First, thanks for the gold, I guess. Second, this happened off Montauk Point in a ripping ebb current going out quickly, so that if anything happened we would be a mile offshore within a few minutes. We were on the VHF with some friends on shore, but the reality of the situation is that no one short of a helicopter will be fast enough to get there before you go hypothermic. Water was in the mid-50s and air in the mid-40s. And even with a helicopter it would be highly unlikely that we get found in those waves. Last, I'm not gonna stand up for being out there in those conditions. It wasn't smart, but to be fair, we left in very acceptable conditions with a forecast saying the winds would be calming down. For us 6/8s are not outlandish at all, and I will go fishing any day of the week in that. And when we went out the breeze was going with the tide, so the waves were much longer. We fished underneath the cliffs at the point all day listening to NOAA still tell us the wind was dying. We didn't know it had picked up until we rounded the point to go home and realized not only had the breeze picked up, but when the tide switched they were not going against each other, so the waves were standing much more vertical. Oh, forgot to add that yes, my dad is a total badass. He has been in conditions much worse than that and understands the realities of being offshore. He's always taught me that you have to respect the ocean, and once you don't, you're dead. So I'm working on an extension to our house, building in the garage. My wife has to pop out to the shops and leaves my youngest, at the time 6, and her cousin, 5, in my care. We're putting up plasterboard and the bricklayers are working, but I still try and check on them regularly. Suddenly I realize there is silence from upstairs where they were playing. Parents, you know the silence I'm talking about. The lack of sound that means your kids are doing something they shouldn't. I call out to them. No response. Fuck. Run upstairs and they're not in the room they were playing in. Call out again. There's a muffled response from our bedroom as the door is closed. I burst through that door like an NFL linebacker and there they are. Sitting in the middle of our bed with my wife's makeup parade around them. They are covered in the stuff. Lipstick smeared all over their faces. There is foundation ground into our brilliant white duvet that my wife loves. I grab a bag of wet wipes and get to work. 5 minutes and I'm able to remove 99% of the crap off their faces. Then I banish them to the playroom and take the duvet and all the sheets and put them in the wash. Toss in the bottom of the bin one of my wife's compacts that has had all the powder lost from it. She has others. Once that is done I head to the playroom. They are looking at me. They know they are in trouble. I crouch down in front of them. Listen girls, do you want to do a sleepover tonight? Sleepovers are their most favorite thing ever. Yes. They squeal. Okay, we can do that, but only if you don't tell your mothers about playing with the makeup. If you do that, you'll get in trouble and you won't be allowed a sleepover. They both agree solemnly and then go back to celebrating their unexpected bounty. I go back downstairs and return to work. Wife arrives home about 10 minutes later. Shortly thereafter she comes downstairs. Why did you put the duvet and sheets in the wash? I only changed them yesterday. I look puzzled. Sorry, I thought they always got washed on Saturday. I was just trying to help you out. Oh, by the way, I promised the girls they could have a sleepover here tonight. Hope that is okay. Wife thinks I'm sweet for helping out with the laundry. Sleepover is 100% okay. They never told. There were no marks on the duvet. Wife thought she lost her compact somewhere. I'm not the dad in this situation, but his son. When I was 17, the summer before my senior year in high school, I was helping my father and his friend Hot Rod clear out 13 acres of land in a bootleg excavation contract. We had a pile of white oak that we needed to burn that was the size of a small house. Dad and Hot Rod had gone to a small engine repair shop and traded who knows what for a 55-gallon drum of used oil that they poured into a loader bucket and dumped on top. They weren't aware that the oil also had gasoline mixed in it, so my father sent me to the top of the pile with a torch to light the oil and jump off. Nope. August in Virginia is not only hot as hell but also humid, so the gasoline vapors had collected inside of the foliage and exploded, engulfing me in a flash of flame. I got blown off the pile of brush onto the ground and immediately felt like I had bad sunburn until I saw my hand smoldering and ran to the water cooler and shoved my arm into it. That then sent lightning through my arm and helped me realize my face was also burnt. My father, quick to react, mustered all of his medical training into one sentence and 3 handouts. Chug this beer, take this Motrin 800, and smoke this bowl. I had known forever my dad smoked pot, but it was sort of an unspoken pact. We didn't talk about it. Needless to say, I get this speech. Son, now we can call the ambulance, but they are gonna call the cops, and the man is going to come out here and probably lock me and Hot Rod up. It'll probably take them 45 minutes to get home, and your mom is going to beat my fucking ass to a pulp. So if you don't think you need to call the man, I'm just going to take you home. It's about an hour home, and on the way I started crying, obviously in shock, about how I didn't want my mom to get mad at me. That's all I kept saying. Dad really didn't say much, because that's just how he is. We pull into the driveway. He says, you stay out here. I'm going to go talk to your mother. And after a few minutes, he sticks his head out the front door and waves me inside. Mom didn't say a word. She acted like everything was as right as the rain. She had to cut my shirt off of me, and I hopped in the shower, then was trying to eat a bowl of cereal, but the right side of my face was swollen shut, so I was just making a mess. Mom comes in the kitchen. Hey baby, so, you think we should head to the I said sure, and we went. Mom was parking her car, and I was trying to fill out the paperwork with my left hand. People all around me were looking at me like I was the spawn of Satan. Had no idea what I looked like. Got seen. 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Administered Demoral. Went home. Don't remember a week of my life. Mom said she would come into my room, restart the Dave Matthews Band DVD in my player when she heard the menu music, put a Percocet in my mouth, and 3 times a day feed me soggy honey bunches of oats. I wake up, see myself in the mirror for the first time, had half a beard on the left side of my face, and the right side looked like extra crispy from KFC. I started crying, not thinking I would ever be the beautiful young man I once was. Mom comes in the bathroom, hugs me, and says, well son, next time you are filling a chainsaw make sure it's not running. That snuffer bitch pulled a don't tell mom to save his own ass, and made me look like the idiot in the process. I'm not mad at him, never was. We joke around about it still. He always shuts up when I tell him to make sure X, Y or Z is turned off before he goes to fill it up. I have a little scarring on my hand where the burn was the worst, but nothing you don't notice when it's not cold outside or I don't have a tan. TLDR, my dad accidentally set me on fire and lied to my mom to save his ass. My dad and I were hunting. This was a long time ago, 2 states over. Dad, a friend, myself, and the friend's son. 2 days in, my old man lets loose a few shots at the whisper/shadow of moose we'd been hunting on and off for 2 days. This particular year those moose were really stressed and they were jumpy and frantic. The bullet through and through the neck, a small sapling, and goes for another 1.5 miles, hitting another hunter who was following the moose from another direction. The bullet was close to its terminal decline and pierced his leg transverse through the calf. We hear the howls, and his companion, also a youngish son, was in a panic. This was deep in the forest in Maine, out past Jackman, which truly is wilderness, especially at that time, before cellular communications, before satellite communications. We knew there was a tagging station in the range of 10 miles. I was 11, our hunting partner's kid was 12, the wounded hunter's son was also 12. My dad was a retired army medic who had seen some shit in Korea, and the wounded hunter was a Vietnam vet. My dad did a field dressing and stopped the bleeding, but the guy was immobile and in a lot of pain, and we could see the ripped muscle underneath the dressing. So it was decided the 3 boys would hike back to our jeep, drive it back to the nearest point of entry to pick up the wounded man, and then go to the tagging station to call for help. So we hiked 8 miles, the other kid crying his eyes out, drove the jeep. I was nominally able to drive. It was an old jeep with 3 on the floor gear shift I think, through some serious woods, off-road for most of it, back to the site. I had about 2 years of Boy Scouts and some basic woods knowledge for navigation. We get back, the guy is in serious shock. My dad and the hunting partner had created a litter. We all worked to get the wounded dad on it, carry him about 1,000 yards to the edge of a sketchy trail, load everyone up. I start to get out, and my dad looks at me and says something I will not never remember. Looks like you got this one son, and I drive to tagging station. The ambulance transported the man to the hospital, but the guy's kid was in the middle of nowhere, so we arranged to get him to relative. Then we stayed at the shittiest motel I've ever stayed in to this day before heading home. When we got home, all that was ever said to mom was in response to her question, "Did you bag anything?" My dad responded in his best way, "Nothing we could keep." I took my 2-year-old son to the mall one Saturday afternoon to give my wife a break. We checked out the Lego store and watched the skaters in the rink and generally had a pretty nice time. Now I'm a TCU football fan, and after a couple of hours I started to wonder how the game was going when I remember there was a sports bar in the mall. Specifically it was a Hooters. So we both strolled down to the Hooters to catch up on the scores and maybe get some wings. I would not normally take my 2-year-old to a Hooters, but I was really curious about the score and hungry. My son was a big hit with the waitresses, and they made a fuss over him while I watched the end of the game. I guess they don't get many baby customers. They brought him a special jelly sandwich and showed him the Hooters owl logo on a coaster and told him it meant Hooters. He then saw the same owl logo on the waitresses' t-shirts and pointed at their chests and yelled Hooters, Hooters, Hooters. which really cracked everyone up and encouraged him to keep doing it. He drew quite a crowd and was a big hit. But as funny as all this was, I knew my wife would not necessarily appreciated the humor, so I elected to keep the Hooters part of the afternoon to myself. I didn't have to tell my son to not tell mom because, you know, he was only 2. So it's maybe a month later and me, my son, my wife and her parents are all in the van going to get some Mexican food. By this time I was on my way to completely forgetting about our more Hooters adventure. My son is strapped in his baby seat in the back sitting between his granny and granddad when I made the mistake of driving past a different Hooters. As we passed, my son saw the big sign out front with our logo and went nuts and started yelling Hooters, Hooters, Hooters. I thought oh shit and kept driving. My wife and her parents stared at my son in shocked, surprised silence. I guess that was not the response he expected, so he doubled down and started slapping his grandmother's chest and yelled Hooters, 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 and laughing. My wife was beet red when she turned to me and asked how does he know about Hooters? There are times when honesty is the best policy and you have to fess up and tell the truth. This was not one of those times. I said I don't know. Maybe he saw it on TV. I know, pretty lame. But I stuck with that story like a drowning man to a life preserver until I sold it. My son couldn't watch TV unsupervised until he was 13. Being 26 right now, when I was little, Pokemon had just hit the shelves in the US. My father bought me Pokemon Red and he got himself a copy of Pokemon Blue, and thus our Pokemon tradition was born. Every time a new group of games came out, we would each get one and play and bond over the new games. My father was a cardiologist, quite a spectacular one at that, so he was always on call and went to different hospitals across the country for days/weeks at a time to help build up cardiology centers in hospitals across the US. Fast forward to my 6th grade year in middle school. It was 11 AM and all of a sudden I was pulled from class and told that I had to leave for a doctor's appointment. I get to the office and there was my dad. That in itself was surprising, because he was supposed to be in Anchorage, Alaska for another week. He said we were going to the doctor's and then we would head home. But as I got into our car, he tossed a beige bubble mailer at me and just grinned from ear to ear. I opened the package and inside were 2 Japanese versions of the new Pokemon games that had literally been out 3 days in Japan. This was the early days of shipping and buying things online, so it was a huge surprise that he got them, especially since you couldn't just hop on eBay or Amazon and order them. We went to get some lunch and then we went home and played Pokemon for hours, just the 2 of us. My mother was a nurse manager at this point and was more of the tough parent since I spent a lot more time with her than my dad. He was allowed to be the good guy since he had to travel a lot. He looked at me about a half hour before my mom was supposed to get off work and said we are going to do this again tomorrow, but if you tell mom, we are both going to get it. So say nothing, it's just our dude's secret. My mom got home and he surprised her with flowers and was just happy to be home a week early, and it is honestly one of my favorite memories of my father. My dad was killed a year later in a shooting, and this was one of the last times we got to just hang out together, and I will always remember it fondly, and I plan on doing the same type of thing with my kids when I have them. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.